I extend a very warm welcome to my channel, Grow Joyfully. In the three-part series, I share how I collect, store, and make use of the free gift from Mother Nature, the dry leaves in my terrace garden. In the first video, I provide a summary of the different uses of the dry leaves in my garden. Come autumn season, which starts around mid-December in South India where I live, leaves start falling. When they are green, they have done their duty so well in photosynthesis. As they turn dry and fall off, they are ready to contribute too. And they are bountiful gift from Mother Nature, available totally free. Research findings show that dry leaves are rich in macronutrients like carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And they also have additional trace nutrients and minerals like boron, zinc, iron, etc. Of course, the amount of nutrients varies substantially based on the species, the soil fertility, and also the climate. The concentrations of macro and micronutrients may be very small. Still, dry leaves can be a very valuable component in promoting the health and fertility of soil or our potting mix in our garden. I use dry leaves as mulch on all my containers. I also use dry leaves as browns in aerobic composting. Moistened dry leaves are loved by my worms in my Vermi Composting bins. I use the dry leaves also to layer the bokashi pickle in the second stage of bokashi composting. And finally, since I get dry leaves in large quantities, I make leaf mold or leaf compost, and I use it as a substitute for coco peat. Mulching refers to placing of dry leaves on top of the potting mix in the containers. Mulching helps in many ways. It retains moisture, which is a very important criterion in the harsh summer season that we face. Mulching reduces water evaporation, cuts down on the water requirements also to some extent. Mulching provides an excellent feed for the earthworms that thrive in your potting mix. As the dry leaves limit the amount of light that reaches the potting mix, it makes it harder for weed seeds to germinate and grow. Mulching acts as an insulating layer that helps keep the temperature of the potting mix cooler in summer and warmer in winter. So it helps to maintain optimal temperature. Finally, as leaves decompose slowly, they release their nutrition into the potting mix, and hence our potting mix gets enriched. Here you see a mix of dry leaves and twigs getting added to the top of the potting mix in a 20-liter container to a depth of 2 inches. I try to mulch my containers the entire year. Of course, it depends upon the availability of dry leaves. I give more importance to mulching in summer. I place dry leaves to a depth of 2 to 5 inches depending upon the size and the volume of the container. And if I'm not sure of the cleanliness of the dry leaves, I simply add a little neem powder when I add the mulch. In aerobic composting, the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the decaying matter in the bin is very crucial in producing a quick result. A ratio of 30:1 is considered ideal, 30 parts of carbon-rich material to 1 part of nitrogen-rich material. The carbon-nitrogen ratio of dry leaves is usually over 30, often around 50. So they make very ideal candidates as brown material, available totally free. Browns can be in the form of cardboard or dry leaves. I always prefer dry leaves. You can see that these are the Ashoka leaves which I get from a nearby apartment complex. If possible, you crush them, but since I do on a large scale and they are actually dry, I don't crush them as well. You can use any kind of leaves that are available. I use mango leaves from my garden. I use jackfruit leaves. I use Ashoka leaves. Sometimes I get fungi leaves, fungi flowers. I use them. I don't use cardboard at all because I get leaves in plenty. No need to crush them also. If possible, if you have the time, you crush. Otherwise, they are quite dry and they will disintegrate. I simply follow the 3:1 policy. It works very well for me. So, you don't require a measuring equipment. I take one handful of the greens. And now, I simply take 3 handfuls of the browns. The bedding in vermicomposting bins comprises of moistened browns. While there are many sources, dry leaves happen to be the most natural ones. Moistened dry leaves mimic the forest floor habitat, providing the most appropriate source of carbon to the worms. While preparing the bedding in my worm bin, I use a mix of cardboard shreddings, dried leaves, and dried cow dung, all moistened. I soak the dry leaves. Sometimes I shred them, sometimes I place the leaves in full in the bin. Worms don't seem to mind at all. And the twigs and the tiny branches provide aeration in the bedding. Bokashi composting involves 2 stages. The first stage involves anaerobic fermentation of the green matter. The second stage involves aerobic decomposition of the fermented bokashi matter, which we call as pickle. An easy way of doing this in the urban context is to do the aerobic composting of the pickle with layering of dried leaves. When I get dry leaves in excess, I use them in 3 different ways. First, I place dry leaves and garden waste in the form of twigs and tiny branches at the bottom of the container. What you see here is my garden waste. Once plants complete their life cycle and die, we dry the branches and leaves and cut them to smaller pieces. Here I am showing you how I get started with filling the container. I add the garden waste in the form of twigs and then the dried leaves. The twigs prevent matting of leaves. Together, the mix decomposes slowly and adds nutrition to the potting mix. The second way in which I use excess dry leaves is with old potting mix. After the plants die, I solarize the potting mix and I leave it to rest. But before resting, I layer it with dry leaves. I keep it in partial shade and keep the mix moist for a couple of months before reusing the old potting mix. Here I find that the clayiness of the potting mix gets reduced when I add dry leaves. The third way by which I make use of excess dry leaves is to make what is called leaf compost or leaf mold. This is an excellent soil conditioner and I find this to be a very effective substitute for coco peat. I have been making leaf mold for the last 5 years and I have stopped using coco peat in my garden. It has a lot of benefits and I'll explain this in a separate video. We have seen some wonderful uses of dry leaves in the gardening context. The first step, of course, is to collect the dry leaves. You may have queries and doubts. In the urban context, is it really easy to collect dry leaves? What kind of leaves do we search for? How do we source them easily? How do we store them before usage? I'll be sharing my experiences on these aspects in my next video. Thanks for watching my videos. Have a great day.